For more than 1,000 years, Iceland remained hidden from the world, a lonely island trapped between fire and ice. Most people believed its people were simple descendants of Viking settlers. Nothing unusual, nothing mysterious. But modern DNA research uncovered something impossible, a genetic signature found almost nowhere else on Earth, entire bloodlines preserved for centuries. Mutations so rare, scientists struggled to explain them, and then researchers discovered something even stranger. Many Icelanders carried genetic patterns that no longer existed in Scandinavia itself. The very place their ancestors supposedly came from. That discovery changed everything, because Iceland was never meant to become genetically isolated. Not this isolated, not this unique. So what really happened on this frozen island? And why does Icelandic DNA look unlike almost any population alive today? The answer begins over 1,000 years ago, long before modern science. Long before genetics, back when the North Atlantic was still feared by sailors. The year was around 870 AD. Northern Europe was changing violently. Kings fought for power, tribes disappeared, and Viking warriors crossed oceans searching for land untouched by rulers. Some sailed west, farther west than anyone expected. Into freezing storms, into black waters, toward an island no empire wanted. Iceland at first, the island looked uninhabitable. Volcanoes tore open the earth, glaciers covered mountains, winters killed livestock. The landscapes itself seemed alive, hostile, ancient. Yet the settlers stayed. Families built farms beside lava fields. Children grew up under endless winters. Generation after generation remained trapped on the same isolated island, and slowly, something unusual began happening. Their bloodlines stopped mixing with the outside world. Europe changed constantly. Wars, migration, disease, empires rising and collapsing. But Iceland remained almost untouched. The island became a genetic time capsule, a frozen snapshot of medieval humanity. At least, that was the official explanation. But the deeper scientists looked, the stranger the story became, because Icelandic DNA wasn't simply preserved. Some of it appeared nowhere else, not in Norway, not in Denmark, not even among Viking descendants abroad. This is where the story gets strange. Researchers first noticed it while studying inherited diseases. Certain illnesses appeared in Iceland at unusually high rates. At first, doctors blamed isolation. Small population, limited marriages, simple explanation, but one detail didn't fit. Some rare mutations survive for centuries without disappearing. That shouldn't happen naturally, especially not in such a tiny population. Then scientists mapped Icelandic family records, and Iceland had something no other nation possessed. Nearly complete genealogical records stretching back over 1,000 years. Births, deaths, marriages, entire bloodlines documented in extraordinary detail. Few places on Earth had preserved history this carefully. Researchers realized Iceland was different. Not just culturally, biologically, the island offered scientists a perfect genetic laboratory. One population, one isolated environment, 1,000 years of traceable ancestry. No one expected what came next. When researchers compared Icelandic DNA to the rest of Europe, they uncovered a contradiction. Most Icelandic men trace back to Norse Viking ancestry. That made sense, but many Icelandic women did not. Large portions of maternal DNA trace back to Celtic regions. Ireland, Scotland, the Hebrides, not Scandinavia. The discovery shocked historians because old Viking stories barely mentioned Celtic women at all. But the DNA told another story, a darker story. Many historians now believe Viking settlers brought women from the British Isles to Iceland, some willingly, others possibly as slaves. The island itself may have been built from two worlds forced together. Norse fathers, Celtic mothers, and over centuries their descendants became trapped in isolation. The ocean protected them, but it also sealed them away. Generation after generation inherited the same genetic patterns, the same mutations, the same invisible signatures buried deep in their DNA. And because Iceland remained isolated for so long, those rare traits survived. In larger countries, migrations constantly reshaped populations. Genes mixed endlessly, but Iceland barely changed. Even disasters failed to break the isolation. Volcanic eruptions destroyed farms. Brutal winters caused famine. Diseases killed thousands. Still, the island remained genetically closed, and that created something extraordinary. Modern scientists can trace Icelandic ancestry farther back than almost anywhere else on Earth. One tiny mutation can reveal centuries of family history. One blood sample can expose connections across hundreds of years. What they found shocked everyone. Some genetic variants linked to diseases existed in Iceland at rates far higher than anywhere else. Alzheimer's, rare cancers, heart conditions, but alongside those risks came something valuable. Clues, because Icelandic DNA became one of the most important tools in modern medical research. Scientists realize isolated populations reveal hidden patterns more clearly. Rare mutations become easier to track. Family inheritance becomes visible. Diseases leave fingerprints. And Iceland became the perfect map. Suddenly, pharmaceutical companies arrived. Genetic researchers flooded the country. Blood samples became priceless. One company, Decode Genetics, began building one of the world's largest genetic databases. Millions of records, DNA linked to family trees, medical histories connected across generations. It was revolutionary, but deeply controversial. Because an unsettling question emerged: who truly owns genetic history? The people, the scientists, or the corporations studying them? Some Icelanders feared their ancestry was becoming a product. Others feared something even worse. What if their DNA revealed secrets nobody wanted exposed? Because genetics doesn't just reveal disease, it reveals origins, nimristrations, high ancestry. And sometimes uncomfortable truths. Researchers continued digging deeper, and another anomaly appeared. Certain Icelandic genetic lines showed remarkable stability across centuries. Too stable. Almost untouched. That level of preservation is incredibly rare in human history. Most populations change rapidly over time. Iceland barely did. The island functioned almost like a sealed container. A human experiment shaped by geography itself. Volcanoes isolated them, the ocean isolated them, the climate isolated them, and inside that isolation, evolution moved differently, slowly, quickly. Like a clock ticking beneath the ice, but then something changed. Modern travel arrived. Globalization reached Iceland. Foreign migration increased. The island finally opened to the world. And scientists realized something disturbing. The genetic uniqueness of Iceland might slowly disappear. The very thing that made Iceland extraordinary could vanish within generations. For centuries, isolation preserved those rare bloodlines. Now connection threatened to erase them, and that created a strange contradiction. The same isolation that once endangered Icelanders also protected their genetic identity. Without it, modern science might never have uncovered these patterns at all. Yet the story became even stranger when ancient skeletons entered the investigation. Archaeologists began studying Viking Age graves across Iceland, bones preserved beneath volcanic soil. Frozen fragments of early settlers, DNA extracted directly from the dead. The results complicated everything again. Some early Icelanders appeared more genetically diverse than modern Icelanders. That shouldn't have happened. Over time, isolated populations usually become more diverse through survival, but Iceland seemed to narrow genetically instead. Why? Researchers suspect repeated disasters reshaped the population again and again. Famines, plagues, volcanic winters, entire family lines vanished, others survived by chance. A brutal process called genetic drift slowly transformed the island, not through selection, not through superiority, through survival alone. Randomness shaped the future of Icelandic DNA, one storm. One eruption, one harsh winter, any of them could erase entire bloodlines forever, and over centuries they did. That's why modern Icelandic DNA feels so unusual. It wasn't created by one event. It was sculpted slowly, by isolation, by disaster, by survival, and by time itself, but there was one final discovery that unsettled researchers most. A rare mutation linked to Alzheimer's disease appeared to protect some Icelanders instead of harming them. A tiny genetic variation, almost invisible, yet it seemed to reduce cognitive decline. Scientists around the world became obsessed because hidden inside Icelandic DNA might exist clues capable of changing modern medicine forever. One isolated island, one preserved population. 1,000 years of genetic history, all leading toward answers humanity still doesn't fully understand. Everything pointed toward a simple explanation: isolation created uniqueness. Case closed. But there was one detail researchers couldn't explain, one question buried beneath every discovery. If Iceland remained so isolated, how did certain rare genetic markers appear there before appearing elsewhere in Europe? That detail changed the entire investigation. Because suddenly Iceland no longer looked like a frozen genetic museum. It looked like something else entirely, a missing chapter of human migration. And that question has never been fully answered. For centuries, Iceland looked simple, a remote Viking island. Cut off from the world, its strange DNA patterns were blamed on isolation. Nothing more, that was the official explanation. But the deeper scientists searched, the more contradictions appeared. Some genetic markers in Iceland seemed older than expected. Others appeared nowhere else in Scandinavia. And certain maternal bloodlines pointed toward places Viking history barely mentioned. Ireland, Scotland, small coastal settlements erased by time. Suddenly Iceland wasn't just an isolated island anymore. It became evidence, a living archive of forgotten migration. And hidden inside that archive was a question researchers still struggle to answer. Who were the first true ancestors of Iceland? Now the investigation went deeper. In the late 1990s, genetic technology changed completely. DNA sequencing became faster. More accurate, more dangerous. Researchers no longer studied small samples. They studied entire populations, and Iceland became their perfect target. The country had fewer than 300,000 people at the time. Most families remained traceable for centuries. Church records connected generations like a giant human web. Few nations possessed records this complete. Scientists could follow bloodlines backward through time almost year by year. It was unprecedented. Researchers began collecting genetic samples on a massive scale, blood tests, family histories, medical records. Thousands volunteered willingly, others felt uneasy. Because no one truly understood where this research would lead, one company dominated the project, Project DHEOD Genetics, a biotech firm founded in Reykjavik. Their goal sounded simple: the DNA of Iceland. But the scale became enormous. Entire family trees were digitized, millions of genetic relationships connected together. Scientists weren't just studying disease anymore. They were reconstructing human history itself. And then the anomalies started appearing again. Researchers noticed Icelanders shared unusually long stretches of identical DNA. Much longer than most European populations. That meant something important. Their ancestors remained genetically connected for centuries. Isolation had preserved ancient patterns modern Europe lost long ago. This is where the story gets strange. When scientists compared Icelandic DNA against ancient Scandinavian remains, the matches weren't always perfect. Some Icelandic lineages carried older versions of Norse ancestry, like frozen echoes from the Viking Age. Meanwhile, mainland Scandinavia had changed. Centuries of war and migration reshaped Europe constantly. But Iceland remained relatively still. Like a biological photograph trapped in time, what they found shocked everyone. Modern Icelanders may preserve genetic snapshots closer to medieval Scandinavians than Scandinavians themselves. An entire lost genetic landscape survived on one volcanic island. But there was another side to this discovery. A darker side. Isolation protects genes, but it also magnifies dangers. Rare inherited diseases became unusually concentrated in Iceland. Certain cancers appeared more frequently. Neurological disorders spread through connected bloodlines. Mutations passed silently for generations. And because everyone remained genetically linked, one mutation could travel astonishingly far. Scientists uncovered cases where distant relatives shared dangerous variants inherited from common ancestors centuries earlier. The island wasn't just preserving history, it was preserving vulnerability, yet hidden among those dangers were extraordinary discoveries. Researchers identified rare protective mutations almost impossible to find elsewhere. One variant seemed linked to lower Alzheimer's risk. Another appeared connected to cholesterol regulation. Suddenly, pharmaceutical companies realized Icelandic DNA could become medically priceless. The island transformed into a global research goldmine, and not everyone felt comfortable about it. Some Icelanders feared their genetic heritage was becoming corporate property. Others worried about privacy, because DNA reveals more than illness. It reveals ancestry, identity. Secrets families never intended to expose. Some people discovered unexpected relatives. Others uncovered hidden parentage. Generations of silence collapsed under modern genetics. One test could rewrite an entire family history, and then ancient graves complicated everything again. Archaeologists extracted DNA from Viking skeletons buried beneath Icelandic soil, teeth, bones. Fragments preserved by cold volcanic earth. The results created another contradiction. Early Icelandic settlers appeared more genetically diverse than later generations. That meant Iceland didn't begin as an isolated genetic world. It became one slowly, through centuries of death, disaster, and survival. The island experienced repeated catastrophes. Volcanic eruptions poisoned farmland, ash blocked sunlight, livestock died, famine spread relentlessly. Then came disease. Smallpox outbreaks devastated communities. Entire farms disappeared forever. Each disaster reduced genetic diversity further, not intentionally, not selectively, randomly. This process has a name, genetic drift, and Iceland became one of the clearest examples on Earth. One family survives a winter, another doesn't. One bloodline continues, another vanishes permanently. Over hundreds of years, randomness reshaped the island's biology. That's why Icelandic DNA feels so rare today. It wasn't designed, it survived, barely. But researchers eventually uncovered something even stranger. Some maternal bloodlines in Iceland traced overwhelmingly toward Gaelic ancestry, far more than expected. This changed historical understanding completely. Because old Viking narratives focus mostly on Norse settlers, warriors, explorers, chiefs, but genetics revealed another hidden population, women from Celtic regions. Many likely taken during Viking raids across Ireland and Scotland. Some historians believe large numbers arrived in Iceland unwillingly, captured, sold, transported across the sea. The DNA survived even when their stories did not. That realization changed the emotional weight of the research. Icelandic identity wasn't purely Viking, it was layered, complicated, built from both conquest and survival. And that question has never been fully answered. How many voices disappeared before history began recording names? Researchers kept digging deeper into ancient ancestry. Then another mystery surfaced. A small percentage of Icelandic DNA showed traces difficult to classify cleanly within known Norse or Celtic groups, tiny fragments, ancient signatures, possibly connected to forgotten migrations around the North Atlantic. Scientists debated constantly where these remnants from older European populations, or evidence of contact history barely documented at all. No one knew for certain, But one theory kept returning. Long before Iceland became famous, sailors may have crossed northern waters more often than historians once believed. Tiny movements, small groups, brief encounters erased from written history. Most left no trace, except possibly in DNA, and DNA remembers everything. That's what made Iceland terrifyingly valuable to science. The island preserved clues larger civilizations erased centuries ago. In crowded continents, populations mix endlessly, genes blur together, but Iceland slowed that process down. Enough for researchers to study human history almost frame by frame, one mutation at a time, one family at a time, one grave at a time, and then came the discovery that changed medicine itself. Scientists studying Icelandic genomes identified rare protective variants affecting Alzheimer's disease. One specific mutation appeared to slow cognitive decline dramatically. Global attention exploded overnight because hidden inside one tiny island population might exist clues capable of helping millions worldwide. Think about that for a moment, an isolated volcanic island, less populated than many cities, and buried inside its bloodlines could exist answers to humanity's deadliest diseases. No one expected what came next. The more researchers studied Icelandic genetics, the more they realized modern humanity may underestimate isolated populations entirely. Small groups preserve information, large populations lose, ancient variants survive, rare protections remain visible. Hidden patterns emerge clearly. Iceland became proof that isolation doesn't only create weakness, sometimes it preserves knowledge biology refuses to forget. And yet the island still carries scars from that same isolation. High rates of inherited disorders continue affecting families. Genetic connections remain unusually close. The advantages came with consequences. Always, that balance defines Iceland's story: preservation and vulnerability, survival and loss, mirror and silence. Then researchers turn toward one final question: what happens next? Because Iceland is changing rapidly now, tourism exploded, immigration increased, globalization connected the island to the world. Permanently, the old isolation is disappearing. Future generations will become more genetically mixed, more globally connected. The rare patterns scientists once studied may slowly fade. The genetic time capsule is opening. And once opened fully, that can never close again. That realization created urgency among researchers worldwide. Because Iceland today may represent the last moment, scientists can study this population in its historic form, 1,000 years of relative isolation ending within a few generations, quietly, almost invisibly. But the deeper meaning goes beyond science. This story is really about memory, about how humans survive across centuries, about what gets preserved, and what disappears forever. Every Icelandic genome carries echoes of storms, famines, volcanoes, nebriscations, raids, lost mothers from distant shores, forgotten fathers buried beneath lava fields, history written directly into blood. Most nations lost those details long ago. Iceland kept them frozen beneath the ice. That's why the island matters, not because its people are different, but because their history remained unusually visible. DNA turned invisible ancestors into evidence, and suddenly forgotten lives became impossible to ignore. A Celtic woman carried across the sea 1,000 years ago. A Viking farmer surviving volcanic winter. A child inheriting one rare mutation that outlived empires. All of them still exist, hid inside modern Icelanders, alive in microscopic fragments. That realization changes how we see ancestry itself. We imagine history as kings, wars maps, but real history survives in ordinary people, in bloodlines, in children, in tiny genetic signatures passing silently through time. And Iceland preserved those signatures better than almost anywhere else on Earth, yet one mystery still remains unresolved. Researchers still debate whether Iceland contains genetic traces from contacts history never documented properly. Small, unexplained fragments remain difficult to classify completely. Most scientists urge caution. There's no evidence of anything supernatural, no lost civilization, no secret race. But there are still unanswered questions. And unanswered questions keep researchers awake at night because history is rarely complete. Records vanish, stories disappear, human memory fails, DNA doesn't. Somewhere beneath Iceland's glaciers and volcanic fields, more graves still remain undiscovered, more skeletons, more evidence, more forgotten names. And somewhere inside those remains may exist the final missing piece, explaining how this isolated island became genetically unlike almost anywhere else on Earth. The Viking Age ended, the kingdoms vanished. The old bloodlines weakened, but the evidence survived, frozen beneath ash and ice, waiting patiently for modern science to uncover it. And somewhere tonight, inside a laboratory freezer, inside a buried grave, or inside the blood of an ordinary Icelander, final answer still exists. We just haven't found it yet.